I never expected to be the center of attention at my brother's wedding. But certainly not like this. As I stepped into the lavishly decorated reception hall, I could already feel eyes following me. The air smelled of white roses, champagne, and judgment. Laughter bubbled in corners, smiles bloomed on familiar faces, but none reached me. I wasn't family anymore, I was a spectator. I found my seat at the far end, tucked away like an afterthought. No one came to greet me. No one acknowledged my presence. Just as I reached for a glass of water, I saw Harper glide past in her ivory gown, her arm laced in my brother's. Harper. The girl who once looked at me like I hung the stars. The girl who now wouldn't even glance my way. I swallowed hard, keeping my head down, pretending I wasn't affected. Pretending the pain didn't rise like bile in my throat. And then, the moment that would mark me forever. The microphone squealed as my brother, Blake, stepped onto the stage, his grin wide and uncontainable. He raised his glass and cleared his throat. "I just want to thank a very special person," he said, scanning the room dramatically, "the one who made all this possible." The room quieted. Everyone turned, expecting a touching tribute. He smirked. "Thanks to your failure, Brian. I got Harper." Laughter exploded around the hall. My heart plummeted into my stomach. A few gasps mingled with the laughter, but no one said anything to stop it. No one stood up for me. My hands clenched around my glass. I kept my face still, emotionless, like stone, but inside, something cracked. He had humiliated me. Publicly. At his wedding. My parents laughed too. My mother even dabbed tears of joy from her eyes, as if this cruelty was some kind of poetic justice. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply looked down at my lap, my silence ringing louder than the applause echoing through the hall. I wasn't the man they remembered anymore, the failure, the shy boy who once chased dreams too big for his hands. But I let them believe that. I let them enjoy their laughter. Because I knew something they didn't. Just moments later, a sudden gust of wind rustled through the venue doors, followed by the rhythmic thump of spinning blades. A helicopter. Gasps rippled through the guests as a sleek, silver chopper descended onto the grass behind the glass-paneled wall. Heads turned. Phones came out. Whispers buzzed. The doors swung open and a tall man in a black suit stepped out, wind tossing his hair. He adjusted his jacket as he walked confidently through the crowd and up to the stage. The laughter had died completely. He looked at me. "Sorry I'm late, dear," he said, smiling. And then he turned to my brother. "Mr. Blake," he said coldly. "Didn't expect to see you here." My brother's face lost its color. He glanced between me and the man. I stood up slowly, smoothing my jacket, meeting the stunned eyes of the guests. It was my turn to speak. But I didn't need a mic. I just smiled. And the room fell completely silent. The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable, almost suffocating. Everyone was frozen in place, unsure of whether this was some elaborate prank or a scene from a movie they weren't supposed to be a part of. I could see Harper gripping Blake's arm tighter, confusion etched across her face. My brother, who just moments ago had basked in the spotlight, was now blinking rapidly, like his brain couldn't catch up to what his eyes were seeing. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. Because when Martin, the man in the suit, turned and extended his hand toward me, it said everything they needed to know. The man who arrived in a helicopter didn't just know me, he respected me. That was enough to shake every assumption they had built about who I was. "Brian," Martin said warmly, his voice calm yet commanding. "Founder of Nova Link. It's an honor." And just like that, the truth cracked through their illusions like a sledgehammer to glass. The whispers began. Guests leaned into each other, murmuring. "Nova Link? Wait, that Nova Link? That's the tech firm that just signed with international markets." The shift in the air was instant. People who hadn't looked twice at me before now stared like they were seeing a ghost. My mother sat down, her expression stiff, hands trembling around her champagne glass. My father stared, his jaw slack, unable to string a single word together. Blake's mouth opened slightly, then shut, then opened again. He looked like someone had just pulled the ground out from under his feet. Harper? Her expression said everything. That was the face of a woman who had bet on the wrong man. But I didn't look at her long. I didn't need to. This moment wasn't for her. It wasn't for any of them. It was for me. Because for the first time in a long time, I was standing not as the overlooked younger sibling, not as the boy who had been mocked for dreaming too big, but as the man who had quietly built his empire while no one believed in him. Still, I kept my dignity. I didn't smirk. I didn't gloat. I simply turned to Martin and said, "Thanks for making the trip." He nodded. "Couldn't miss it. Your product demo next week is going to shake the industry." But I figured, why wait till then to shake a few people up? We both shared a look that was somewhere between amusement and quiet satisfaction. And the guests? They didn't laugh this time. They watched. Observed. Hushed. The tables had turned. And all I had to do was be silent long enough for the truth to arrive in a helicopter. Inside, my heart was pounding, not from nerves, but from the power of restraint. Because the sweetest kind of revenge is not loud. It's not cruel. It's dignified. And it leaves them speechless. But this moment, this victory, hadn't come without its weight. Standing there, finally seen, finally respected, I couldn't help but remember the road it took to get here. It hadn't been glamorous. It hadn't even been hopeful at times. It had been raw, humiliating, and lonely. Just 2 years ago, I had hit rock bottom. I was back in my childhood bedroom, 30 years old, lying awake on a mattress that still creaked like it did in high school. I had just watched my second startup collapse. Investors had pulled out. My bank account was bleeding. And no one reached out. Not even Blake. Not even Harper. My parents were quick to frame it as a personal failure. "You should have just found a stable job," my dad had said, not hiding his disappointment. "Blake works in finance. Now that's a career." My mom didn't say much, but the way she sighed every time I walked into the room said enough. At the dinner table, Blake would smirk at me between bites of steak and potatoes. He had Harper at his side by then. She was sweet in public, polite even. But I noticed the little digs she'd make when no one was listening. "You're still working on that little tech thing, right?" she once asked, head tilted like I was a child who'd just handed her a crayon drawing. That little tech thing was my dream. And it was crumbling. But what broke me the most wasn't the startup failure or the condescension. It was the day I walked into the kitchen to find them all laughing, my parents, Blake, and Harper, laughing at me. My name had become the punchline. Blake had raised his glass and said, "Honestly, if Brian didn't crash so hard, I might not have met Harper." Silver linings, right? That was the moment. That was the night I packed my bag and left without a word. No drama. No tears. Just silence. I didn't even say goodbye. I couldn't. Because I wasn't leaving just the house, I was walking away from their version of me. The one that failed. The one that wasn't enough. I moved to a city where no one knew my name. I slept on a mattress in a studio apartment the size of a closet, eating canned soup, burning through the last of my savings. I worked nights in a data center just to keep the lights on. And every spare second I had, I built. I studied. I coded. I dreamed. Novalink wasn't built in some Silicon Valley office surrounded by hype and noise. It was born on the floor of that apartment, from the silence they left me in. And that silence, as painful as it was, became the space I needed to grow. No one cheered me on. No one called to ask how I was doing. Not one message. But that was okay. Because over time, I started building not just a company, but myself. Every rejection taught me to stand firmer. Every lonely night made me tougher. And somewhere between the losses and the sleepless months, I stopped caring what they thought of me. I wasn't living to prove anything anymore. I was living to build something that mattered to me. So as I stood at that wedding, hearing Martin call me the founder of Novalink, I didn't feel smug. I felt still. Because what they saw as an overnight success was years in the making. And every brick of that success had been laid with the stones they once threw. The moment after Martin shook my hand was a blur of stiff faces, stunned silence, and widened eyes. The sound of a champagne glass slipping from someone's hand and shattering on the floor echoed louder than any gasp in the room. Blake's jaw tightened. Harper blinked rapidly, her smile frozen mid-expression like a glitching doll. My parents exchanged looks, the kind filled with silent questions, silent panic. I stood calm, nodding politely to Martin before returning to my seat as if nothing had happened. That was the power of quiet success, it didn't need to scream. The whispers began almost immediately. Novalink? That's him? Wait, didn't Blake make a joke about him just now? Didn't he say Brian was a failure? I didn't look around, but I could feel the shift. The air had changed. A moment ago, I was the invisible brother, the disappointment, the one everyone ignored unless he became the joke. Now, I was the storm they never saw coming. But even as I sat still, seemingly composed, inside me, something trembled. Not nerves, just the weight of the years I had carried. The humiliation, the solitude, the late nights spent wondering if I'd made a mistake choosing this path. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, yet it still hit different when it happened for real. Harper was the first to break the awkwardness. She got up from her seat, heels clicking too fast on the polished floor, a brittle smile pasted across her face. Brian. Oh my God, wow, it's so good to see you doing well. I turned to her slowly, meeting her gaze. Thank you, Harper. Congratulations on the wedding, I said, my voice as calm as water, giving her nothing to cling to. She hesitated. You should have told us. You never responded to the invitations. I would've. I figured it wasn't a seat you really wanted me in, I replied, voice even, but my eyes steady. She opened her mouth to respond, but Blake's voice cut through. You're really the founder of Novalink? His tone was sharp, tight, almost accusing. The same Novalink we've been trying to get a deal with for months? I nodded. Yes. I guess fate has a funny way of bringing people together. Blake laughed, one of those forced, hollow laughs that carries no joy. You should have said something. I mean, it's not every day your own brother makes it big. We're proud of you, man. But the way he said proud felt more like pressure. Like a plea. I tilted my head. That's strange. I remember being the reason you were grateful, remember? Thanks to Brian's failure, I got Harper. That's what you said, right? His face flushed red, and a few guests nearby looked away awkwardly. He stammered, trying to brush it off as a joke, but it was too late. The words had landed. The wound had reopened. The difference was, this time, I wasn't the one bleeding. My parents hadn't said a word. Not a single word. My mother sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the table like she was bracing for a wave. My father's mouth was pressed into a firm line, his pride visibly deflating with every second. I didn't look at them for validation. I wasn't here to seek it anymore. I had outgrown the version of me they had tried to define. And they were just now realizing, they couldn't shrink someone who had already learned to grow in silence. I stepped outside for some air. The tension inside the hall clung to me like a second skin. The breeze was cool, crisp, and it carried none of the bitterness that filled the wedding venue. For the first time in a long time, I breathed without weight pressing against my chest. No judgment. No comparisons. Just me. I heard footsteps behind me, slow, hesitant. I didn't have to turn to know it was my mother. Her perfume was the same as always, a floral scent I used to associate with warmth before it became the fragrance of disappointment. She stood beside me in silence, fiddling with the corner of her shawl. So, she said softly, Novalink. I didn't know. I nodded without looking at her. No one asked. She winced at my answer, though I said it without malice. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. We just thought you were still figuring things out, she added, like that would soften the years of being overlooked, dismissed, made to feel like a burden. I remembered birthdays when I got a polite call while Blake got a surprise dinner. The Christmas when I wasn't even invited because it would be too awkward. Figuring things out, I repeated, turning to face her. You mean failing quietly while you cheered for Blake's every step? She looked away. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, Mom. Her eyes glistened with something between guilt and discomfort. We didn't know. You never told us you were doing something big. Would it have mattered if I had? I asked gently. Would you have believed me? Or would you have called it a phase, like you always did? She didn't respond. That silence was the answer. And in that quiet moment, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt free. Because I didn't need her apology anymore. Inside, Harper was talking fast to a group of guests, trying to steer attention away from what had just happened. Blake was pacing near the cake table, muttering to himself. Martin stood calmly, chatting with another executive, completely unfazed. He'd already said what needed to be said. My phone buzzed. A text from Martin, we're launching in Paris next week. I want you there. Bring someone, if you'd like. I smiled. There was a world outside this wedding. A world where I was respected not because of my last name or bloodline, but because of my work, my vision, my silence that built empires. Another set of footsteps approached. This time it was Blake. He looked disheveled, like the truth had wrinkled his perfectly ironed suit. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, voice tight. I turned toward him. Would it have changed anything? I don't know, he said honestly. That's why I didn't. There was nothing more to say. I walked away, not with anger, not with revenge, but with the peace of a man who had let go of needing to prove anything. I wasn't the brother they mocked, nor the boy they ignored. I was the man who built in silence. And now, the silence spoke louder than their noise ever had. The night air wrapped around me as I left the venue completely. My footsteps echoed faintly on the pavement, each step pulling me further away from a past that had kept me caged for far too long. I didn't know where I was going just yet, I only knew I wasn't going back. Not just to the hall, but to the version of myself who used to stand silently in the corner, hoping to be seen. I stopped at a nearby bench and sat down, watching as a few other guests slowly trickled out of the venue. Laughter floated faintly through the air, but it no longer pierced me. It felt distant, irrelevant, like background noise in a life I no longer belonged to. As I sat there, my mind drifted back to the days when my brother and I were just kids. We used to race bikes down the street until sunset, and even then, Blake had always needed to win. And I had always let him. Not because I wasn't fast enough, but because it seemed to matter more to him. That same pattern had followed us into adulthood, me, always stepping aside. Him, always stepping forward. I remembered the time I was accepted into a top-tier engineering university. It was a huge deal for me, I had worked hard, pushed past my own limits. But the day I told my parents, they had responded with, "That's great, Brian, but Blake just got promoted to assistant manager." Can you believe it? That was the day I stopped expecting applause from them. That quiet hurt had shaped me, not into someone bitter, but into someone determined to earn his worth in a way no one could take away or overshadow. I had built Novalink in a small apartment, eating ramen and barely sleeping. Every pitch I gave, every investor meeting, every rejection, they had made me sharper. Stronger. Every moment they forgot me, I remembered myself. I took out my phone and scrolled through photos of the office, the team I had hired, the tech we had developed, the cities we were expanding into. These weren't just wins, they were chapters of a life I had written on my own terms. Not once had I posted them online for my family to see. Not out of spite. I had simply stopped needing their approval. A soft ding pulled my attention to a message from Harper. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. I didn't know you were Brian from Novalink. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel lesser. I read the words twice. Then I deleted them without replying. Not because I was angry, but because her apology wasn't for me. It was for her own guilt. This entire evening had unspooled years of quiet ache, and now, all that remained was the decision to move forward. I stood up from the bench, looked one last time at the glowing wedding venue, and whispered to myself, this chapter's over. And it truly was. Not with rage. Not with drama. Just with peace, the kind that only comes when you finally stop needing closure from people who never gave you credit to begin with. Days passed, but the memory of that night lingered in everyone's mind, everyone except mine. While people whispered about the wedding incident, replaying the moment my brother's boss revealed my identity to the entire crowd, I found myself strangely calm. The echoes of laughter, of Blake's smug voice announcing my failure, had lost all power. They couldn't touch me anymore. What I didn't expect, though, were the messages that followed. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me on Instagram, "Hey, I didn't know you were that Brian. I'm sorry I never took you seriously." An old family friend emailed, "Your brother's wedding was unforgettable. I'm sure Novalink is keeping you very busy. Would love to connect sometime." Even Harper's father reached out. He said he was impressed by my company's mission and wanted to know if I was open to collaboration. I replied with a polite decline. I wasn't interested in partnerships built on guilt or flattery. What meant more to me was the silence from Blake. No apology. No explanation. Nothing. And that silence? It felt like freedom. But not all silence was empty. One evening, I got a call from someone I hadn't expected, my mom. I didn't answer at first. I let it ring. Then I stared at the missed call for a long time, before finally picking up the second time. "Brian," she said, her voice quiet. "I didn't know about your company. Why didn't you tell us?" I paused, then answered, "Because you never asked." Silence on the other end. Then she said, "I'm sorry your brother embarrassed you." "He didn't mean it." "No," I cut in gently. "He meant every word. And it's okay. I'm not angry anymore. Just done pretending I'm the same person I used to be." She sniffled softly. "I wish we had understood you better." I could have said a lot then. I could have laid out every year I felt invisible. Every moment I stood in Blake's shadow. But what was the point? "I understand myself now," I said simply. "That's enough." After we hung up, I realized that moment wasn't closure, it was clarity. I hadn't changed for them. I had changed for me. That weekend, I returned to my office. My team greeted me with enthusiasm, unaware of the storm I had just weathered. We brainstormed new expansions, laughed over coffee, and built the future, together. And in that moment, surrounded by people who respected me not for who I was related to, but for what I had built, I felt whole. Not because I'd gotten revenge. Not because anyone apologized. But because I had finally stopped performing for an audience that never clapped. This new life? It didn't need grand declarations or flashy takedowns. It needed only quiet confidence, earned resilience, and the understanding that dignity speaks louder than revenge ever could. I had rewritten the script of who I was. And this time, I wasn't the punchline, I was the author. The buzz from that wedding night eventually faded, as all scandals do. People moved on, found new stories to gossip about, but something had shifted in the way they looked at me, especially in the way my family did. I wasn't the outcast anymore, nor the overlooked sibling who lived in the shadows of Blake's spotlight. I had become someone they couldn't define, someone who no longer fit their outdated narrative. A week later, I was invited to a family dinner, one of those "let's put this behind us" kind of events. I almost declined. The thought of sitting at the same table as Blake and Harper again made my stomach twist. But part of me wanted to go, not for closure, but to remind myself of how far I had come. I walked into that house dressed as myself. No designer suit. No dramatic entrance. Just calm, steady confidence. Harper avoided eye contact the entire evening. Blake tried to act normal, cracking jokes and pretending like the whole Mike moment had never happened. My parents were overly nice, filling my plate, asking about Novalink like they hadn't ignored it for years. But I didn't feel angry. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I listened, nodded, smiled politely. I didn't flaunt my success. I didn't mention the investors I'd secured, the international expansion we were planning, or the fact that I'd just turned down a buyout offer that would have made headlines. I didn't need to. They already knew. Before I left, Blake pulled me aside. "Hey, Brian, about what I said at the wedding. It was just a joke, man. Heat of the moment, you know?" I met his eyes, those same eyes that used to look down on me for dreaming too big. "It wasn't a joke to me," I replied softly. "But it's okay. I'm not carrying it with me anymore." He looked confused, like he was expecting me to retaliate, to throw it back in his face. But I didn't. I walked out the front door, not with anger, but with peace. And that's when it hit me. The greatest revenge isn't public humiliation. It's not turning the tables for everyone to see. It's walking away, whole and unbothered, when they finally realize they never broke you. A few days later, I stood at a Novalink event in a crisp black shirt, holding a mic, not to defend myself, but to welcome new talent, new dreams, and new beginnings. Cameras flashed. Applause echoed. And as I glanced at the faces in the crowd, young visionaries, former doubters, old friends, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Pride. Not the loud kind that demands attention, but the quiet, grounded kind that comes from surviving the storm with your soul intact. I didn't need Blake's approval. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need anyone to say I was enough. Because I had already become more than they ever believed I could be. And somewhere in the silence between who I was and who I am now, I found peace. That, right there, was my story's final line. And this time, I wrote it myself.